All right, everybody. If you could begin taking your seats. We have a great panel, a great speaker, and we want to get started. I know that you're also having great conversations, but if you can bring them to a close or take them to your tables, we'd all appreciate it. Some of you are better students than others. All right. We can officially now say good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Frericks. I'm the Illinois State Treasurer. You see food sitting in front of you. Some of you are probably trying to be polite, not eat while I'm speaking. Go ahead and start eating. We want to dive right into the program here. You won't offend me unless you start throwing things on the ground or towards me. So it is my honor for you all to be here today for a critical and timely conversation about global threats and opportunities facing our country today, and how America's role in the world matters more than ever to our local communities, especially those of us here in Illinois. I'm delighted to be here with Congresswoman Lauren Underwood. Congresswoman. And I want to thank the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for bringing us together here this afternoon. I'm honored to serve on the Illinois Advisory Committee. USGLC has assembled a powerful group of over 100 leaders from around the state to form this committee. We are Democrats, we are Republicans and independents, pillars of the business, humanitarian and faith communities, civic officials, and military veterans. We have all arrived at the same conclusion. America must continue to be a global leader. In fact, time and time again, we see that military voices are some of the strongest and most effective advocates for America's development and diplomacy programs. These men and women have sacrificed so much in the defense of our nation and our most deeply held values. They deserve our appreciation and our support for their service to our nation. And I would like all of our veterans here with us today to please rise so that we may salute you. Thank you all. Looks like a lot of you already know each other and have clustered together around that table. I know that everyone in this room understands how interconnected our security and prosperity are with the rest of the world, and that America is still and always will be an indispensable nation. At a time when America's role in the world is being debated, both in Washington and around dinner tables across the country, and amid the ever-growing number of global crises, the stakes have truly never been higher for America's global leadership. We know that pulling back, especially now, is simply not in the nation's interest. These are not Democratic or Republican issues. These are issues that affect all Americans. And we hope that when you leave here today, you continue this vital discussion and share what you have learned about America's role in the world with your family, your friends, and your colleagues. Now, to tell us a little bit more about USGLC's work here in Illinois and around the country, I'd like to welcome Jason Goss, Executive Director of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Jason?
Michael, thank you for kicking us off. I'm Jason Gross, Executive Director, U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. It is a privilege to be with all of you in Aurora today, and with a very special guest, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood. I think could easily say that Illinois is very fortunate to have a true champion for America's global leadership on its team in Congress, and is very fortunate to have Congresswoman Underwood already showing that fantastic leadership in her time in Washington. I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be here, especially to members of our Illinois State Advisory Committee. And I want to take a moment to salute our partners for today's event. If you can look at the screen, you'll see, first of all, our local event partners who have very much made today's event possible. We are very grateful for your support. Also for our National Global Impact Project partners who are so critical to supporting our work around the country. And also want to pay a special tribute to Abbott, for joining us today, and Jenna Doherty, who's representing us, who will be up on stage a little later, for your support in making our work around the country possible. And finally, also to Cargill, the chair of our Heartland Initiative, for your support in this region for the dialogue that we're conducting. And we will definitely hear from Taryn Barkley a little later, too, on stage. And thank you for joining us today. USGLC, we're celebrating 25 years in our role of trying to make a better, safer world. And I'd like to take just a moment to tell you about what we've been up to over those 25 years. At USGLC, we're very much storytellers. And what we try and do is tell the story of why American engagement in the world matters locally, including here in Illinois. That's the very heart of our work. We bring together a group of very diverse voices to tell that story of why America's engagement in the world matters to our national interest. We're over 500 businesses, humanitarian organizations, working alongside faith, military, community leaders who come together around the importance of our civilian tools of national power, our development and our diplomacy. We work across the country, from coast to coast, from Maine to Arizona, from Washington State to Florida, and everywhere in between, including here in Illinois. Our bipartisan National Advisory Council boasts some of the leading minds on national security. It includes every living former Secretary of State from Henry Kissinger to John Kerry. We are particularly proud of the growing strength of the military voice in our coalition as well. Our National Security Advisory Council has now over 200 retired 3- and 4-star flag officers and is co-chaired by General Tony Zinni and Admiral James Stavridis. They're backed by over 30,000 veterans for smart power who've returned from the front lines to be able to testify about the importance of our civilian tools as part of our national security. And what unites all of these different groups together is to tell the story of why that small 1% of the overall federal budget, the international affairs budget, represents such a cost-effective and powerful investment for our country. It's sometimes called the foreign aid budget, but we know it's much more than that. It funds so much of what we can do around the world. Our embassies, our diplomats abroad, our Peace Corps, support for key allies, efforts to tackle global health threats like Ebola, respond to humanitarian disasters, and the impact of climate change, and to battle the root causes of terrorism. These programs include efforts to combat corruption, to promote the rule of law, and to advance democracy and universal rights and freedoms around the world. And they include programs to open up new markets for exports of goods from this state and around the country, for public-private partnerships that offer a hand up, not a handout, for millions across the globe. These programs are effective, they are accountable, and they are transparent, and they deliver on behalf of the American people. So now you know a little bit more about us. We want to know a little bit more about what brought you here today, if I can indulge you for the briefest of assignments. If I could ask you to reach in the center of your table and take one of those note cards that are there and write down the answer to this question for me, if you mind. Why does leading globally matter to Illinois? Why does leading globally matter to Illinois? And I'll give you a few seconds to write your response and then ask you what you wrote. I see some furrowed brows, some good answers being written. Okay, let me see by a show of hands what you thought, what you wrote down there. How many of you wrote down something along the lines, it's the right thing to do, it's about our values as Americans? Show of hands from that. I see some definitely. Well, those of you who raise your hands there, I think definitely recognize that America is among the most generous nations on the planet. If you take a look at the PEPFAR program, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, we've saved over 18 million lives over the last 16 years. Or America's signature program to combat global hunger, Feed the Future, has helped lift over 23 million out of poverty since 2011. Now, those are really important expressions of our generosity as Americans. But there's much more that remains to be done when you consider the fact that over 30 million across the globe today are facing famine. Over 71 million displaced from their homes, the largest numbers of refugees since World War II. There is still more to be done in this area, no question. Okay, how many of you wrote something more along the lines of, it keeps us safe, it's about our national security long term? Raise show of hands. I see some over here too. So those of you who raise your hands on that question, I think are very much in line with our current and former military leaders who have testified, have spoken out publicly saying the military alone cannot keep us safe. We have to invest in those development and diplomacy programs to address threats before they threaten to reach our shores. Okay, last grouping. Who wrote something along the lines about our economy? It's about our job growth in the future. Yeah, a lot of hands on that one too. Those who raise your hands for that question, I think recognize that 95% of the world consumers live outside of our borders. That 6 out of the 10 fastest growing markets on the planet are in sub-Saharan Africa. And get this, 11 of America's top 15 export partners today were once recipients of US foreign assistance. If that shows more than anything that the pennies we invest today pay off in dollars back to our economy years later. And we're not the only ones who recognize this, of course. Our friends, our competitors do too. UK, Germany, Japan, investing great sums in the developing world, not to mention China. And the question I think we have to ask today is, are we keeping pace with those challenges, or are we falling behind right now in that competition? And I know a number of business leaders from Illinois joining us today know that leading globally matters a lot to this state economy, when the fact is that over 1.6 million Illinois jobs are supported through international trade. We know the stakes for keeping engaged in that global economy. But don't just listen to them. Let's hear from the real experts on this subject.
Those were smart kids. I'm Peggy Parfenoff, president of World Chicago, and I am a proud member of USGLC's Illinois Advisory Committee. As someone that believes in investing in global development as a basic tenet of our shared American values, it's an honor to be here with you all today. Today, the United States is providing foreign assistance in new and more effective ways than ever before, and organizations from around the country are working tirelessly to make our world a better and a safer place. Investments in organizations like World Chicago are critical to tackling global challenges like poverty, hunger, and disease. When nonprofits and university partners work together with government agencies and business, incredible things start to happen. For example, one of World Chicago's programs brings entrepreneurs from the Balkan region to Chicago. It is a region in the world that has the highest brain drain in Europe. Our program embeds these entrepreneurs in our entrepreneurship ecosystem in Chicago. They discover best practices in their field, and when they leave 5 weeks later, they bring home that culture of entrepreneurship to their region so they can stay and build their economies back home. We've seen firsthand how programs like this impact the entrepreneurship ecosystems around the globe and build partners. Understanding the connection between extremism and economic opportunity makes programs like this not charity, but crucial for our nation. For example, on a recent trip to North Macedonia, I visited Debar, a town settled along the Albanian border, where the departure of talented youth is a serious crisis. Like many economically depressed towns in North Macedonia, youth with ambition leave. They head to Italy and Austria or the US, and those without opportunity very possibly could turn to religious extremism. However, today, in fact, over half of the residents have immigrated abroad. However, there is one business we saw in Debar that was giving people hope. It's Slice Pizza. It's an app we can all get on our phones. It's an IT-based business that is based both in New York City and in Debar, and they have hired 180 local youth in Debar. Their tech jobs pay well, they build 21st century skills, and they give the youth a reason to stay and build their own homes back in North Macedonia. Businesses like Slice show how economic partnerships can build social cohesion and directly reduce violent extremism. Foreign aid also impacts local communities. Through our work with Global Ties US, in 2019, World Chicago received $830,000 of federal money, but that money here in Chicago led to a $2.4 million impact with hotel stays, dining, and of course, shopping. I know many of our visitors have even come out to the outlet malls in Aurora, even though I tell them it's not that much of a savings, but they still come out here to shop. It's not all fun and games. Foreign assistance funds critical programs, from offering life-saving medical treatment to teaching girls and boys to read and write, ensuring access to clean water, and providing relief to disasters. When America leads, we all win. Programs like these so clearly demonstrate how commerce and national security intersect and the importance of U.S. leadership. So whether you joined us today from the business community, the military, or the humanitarian world, I know it's a belief we all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm Jenna Doherty. I am from the global healthcare company Abbott, and in my role as Divisional Vice President of Global Citizenship and Sustainability, we do work around the world in global health and development. We do that not only because we feel it's our responsibility as a leading healthcare company, but also because we know it's good for business. So I'm here this afternoon on behalf of large and small businesses here in Aurora and around the state that understand that local economies rise and fall with the economic currents of the world. As you saw in this very cute video, most people who buy American goods and services do not live in America. And many of them live in the developing world where the markets are fast growing. And let me just reiterate a couple of the statistics that Jason shared, that 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were once recipients of foreign aid. 1 in 5 American jobs are tied to international trade, and 1/3 of all manufacturing jobs in the U.S. are actually tied to our exports. So this topic is very important to everyone at Abbott. More than a century ago, we started our company as a local Chicago company, headquartered on the north side of the city. We are still based here, headquartered here in today. Our headquarters are in northern suburban Lake County. And, but I would say we have long been a global company. Today, Abbott employees, there are more than 100,000 of us around the world, and we have commercial sales in more than 160 countries. All of this work is focused on helping people live better and healthier lives through our life-changing technologies. So those are medical devices, diagnostics, nutritionals, and branded generics medicines. In many ways, everything around the world starts with health. And healthy people drive healthy communities and healthy economies, both here at home and in every country around the world. we are finding that that is more and more interconnected, and it is very clearly apparent in the most recent weeks, particularly as we're seeing around the coronavirus. That's why we feel so passionate about global health and why we rely on critical strategic investments in diplomacy and development. It's key for health and economic prosperity here at home and globally. It's good for the world, and frankly, it's good for American business. So I'm now happy to make some other introductions. Our panel this afternoon is going to feature Vice Admiral Carol Pettinger, who retired as the most senior U.S. military officer in NATO's military command structure. Vice Admiral Pettinger was the first woman in the Navy to command a strike group, Expeditionary Strike Group 7, headquartered in Okinawa, with 8 ships home-ported in Sasebo, Japan. Today, Admiral Pettinger is a member of the USGLC's National Security Advisory Council. Joining the panel is Taryn Barclay, who serves as Cargill's Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships and Stakeholder Engagement, where she leads Cargill's very important work in sustainable development, food security, and corporate responsibility. She spent more than a decade at Cargill, previously working as Director for Corporate Responsibility and Partnerships. Prior to her work at Cargill, she served as Corporate Responsibility Manager at IPC Media. And we will also welcome back USGLC's Jason Gross to moderate the discussion. But first, it is my very distinct pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, representing Illinois' 14th Congressional District. Congresswoman Underwood brings a diversity of experiences to Congress. She is a registered nurse and has served as senior advisor at the Department of Health and Human Services, working on issues of emerging infectious diseases and biothreats. And from her work in Congress to her travels abroad, she knows firsthand that investing in America's development and diplomacy programs is critical to advancing our economic and security interests. Congresswoman Underwood, we are truly grateful for you joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can strengthen America's global leadership.
Thank you all so much. I'm really delighted to be here with you, and thank you, Jenna, for the very warm welcome, and to the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for organizing today's event. I'm really pleased to see representatives from such world-class research institutions like Northern Illinois University here, folks from Fermilab, Argonne National Laboratory, from our Northern Illinois farming community who literally produce food for the world, our manufacturing and supply companies with a global reach, local leaders like Mayor Irvin, and representatives from every layer of local government. Thank you. It is an honor to be with you today to discuss the importance of strong and effective U.S. leadership in diplomacy, especially because the coalition is such a valued partner in convening these conversations on global leadership in Illinois' role. Conversations like these benefit deeply from new and more diverse voices, particularly at a time when it can feel like America's at a crossroads when it comes to how we engage on the world stage. So I'm proud to be here with you, proud to serve in the youngest, most diverse freshman class in the history of the United States House of Representatives. And it's been quite an eventful year when it comes to foreign policy in Congress. As a representative from our community here in Northern Illinois, my top priority is to keep us safe and to help us thrive. U.S. diplomacy and leadership helps us thrive. They translate to better economic conditions and job opportunities for workers and employers right here in Illinois. 1.6 million Illinois jobs are tied to international trade. $65 billion in Illinois exports enter global markets each year. Strong economic relationships with other countries help our economy right here at home. When those relationships suffer because of decisions made high up in Washington, our community suffers too. I see this every day at home as our farmers bear the brunt of this administration's trade war with China. Right now, more than ever, we need leaders who understand the nonpartisan value of America's leadership and diplomacy abroad. As vice chair on the House Committee on Homeland Security, I've worked with the chairman and with other committee members to bring a whole of government approach that includes NGOs and subject matter experts to provide meaningful oversight and support to deter foreign and domestic threats to the homeland. This is evidenced by the committee's work to address growing threats posed by domestic terrorists and by foreign terrorist organizations. It also informs our work on border security. I visited the US-Mexico border and seen firsthand the US border operations. We also learned about the poor conditions many migrants face when fleeing from their home countries. Extreme cases of food insecurity, gang violence, or political unrest have led people and families to take the long and dangerous journey to seek refuge in the United States. As conditions at the southern border evolve, it is important that U.S. foreign investment and assistance are consistently leveraged to improve humanitarian and economic conditions abroad, which in turn strengthens American interests and national security. This also applies to our work in fighting global pandemic and health crises. As I said before, I believe that it's our country's best interest to continue to lead in the fight to promote health and nutrition worldwide. Before I was elected to Congress, I served in the Obama administration as a senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. While I was at ASPR, working on public health emergencies, including providing international cooperation and assistance for countries affected by the Ebola and Zika epidemics, it was evident that the assistance provided was vital to saving the lives of many. As such, I'd be remiss if I did not emphasize how important public health is to global security. This comes at a time when more than 70,000 people have been diagnosed with coronavirus caused by, COVID-19. aka coronavirus, while the number of lives lost increases each day. It's more important now than ever that our departments of state and Health and Human Services have strong relationships with their international counterparts. And America's role in the world is about more than policy, it's about values. I'd like to share the words of another Illinois leader regarding U.S. role in global leadership. These words come from a certain former state senator we all know as President Barack Obama. In 2016, in his last speech at the United Nations, he called for leaders to work together rather than reject global integration. It's in that spirit that we are meeting today, and I think that these words are more important now than ever before. He said, "I do not believe progress is possible if our desire to preserve our identities gives way to an impulse to dehumanize or to dominate another group. If our religion leads us to persecute those of another faith, if we jail or beat people who are gay, if our traditions lead us to prevent girls from going to school, if we discriminate on the basis of race or tribe or ethnicity, then the fragile bonds of civilization will fray. The world is too small. We are too packed together for us to be able to resort to those old ways of thinking." Here in Northern Illinois, we understand this to be true. And we understand that America's leadership role and strong partnerships with allies are not only good for our economy, they're essential for our security and for peace. The tone with which we show moral leadership should set an example not only for the world, but also for our children here at home. Because in addition to all these facts and figures, the way we talk about our allies and our relationships matter, literally the words that we use. The way that we talk about people who come from other countries or grew up differently from us matters, because our kids are listening, they're emulating, and they're repeating it back. And when they hear vitriol from their leaders, they can mirror it themselves. I hosted a listening session this weekend where a parent shared a heartbreaking story that translated to how his kids were treated by other children at school, based on centuries-old divisions in the countries that they immigrated from. And so that is something I ask everyone in this room to be mindful of and help others to keep at the front of their minds. What we lead on the global stage matters right here at home for our national security and economic opportunities, but how we lead on the global stage matters just as much. And that's why I'm proud to carry Northern Illinois' values and voices with me in Washington. It's really a pleasure to be in the room today with such dynamic and high-minded leaders, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I look forward to learning from you as part of our conversation and working together to advance our community's values and interests around the world. Thank you. Thank you.
Name tag. Take your name tag off. It's Pottinger. Right there, that's it. Well, Congressman Underwood, thank you for those remarks. I think reminding everyone in the room right now about how you're already making such a strong mark in Washington with your leadership, as that speech really demonstrates. It's, again, a privilege to be up here to moderate this conversation right now. I'd like all of you to start thinking of some questions yourselves, and my colleagues will have some mics to hear from you. But why don't I start moderating a conversation to get us warmed up, and then we can finish with some of your thoughts as well. Why don't we start with national security and talk about, and I mean, no shortage of crises, of challenges out there to think about, North Korea, China, Russia, Syria, Yemen, in our own hemisphere, Venezuela, and the Northern Triangle. But let me turn to Admiral Pottinger first and talk about something from last year. Last year, we celebrated NATO's 70th anniversary. And as I understand, your last position was at NATO working with our allies on trying to identify emerging threats out there to get them equipped for that. When it comes to talking to us today, how do these investments in our alliances and working with either our allies in Europe for their capabilities about emerging threats, with our close allies like Israel and Jordan, how does investing in alliances and allies and their capabilities mean for our long-term national security?
Thanks, Jason. And may I just say I'm happy to be here. My first event really outside of Washington, D.C. with your Global Leadership Coalition. I'm very proud to take part in this. And I was born in Oak Park up the road. So my mom and dad grew up in Chicago and got married in Chicago. And so it's sort of like coming home. So I'm happy to be here with y'all. So NATO is a very interesting creature, more pole than mill, political than military. And having grown up in the military and then going over to do a job that is predominantly political is a real eye-opener for a Navy girl. But it's really the word you've heard already all morning is relationships. You need those relationships. You need those common understandings. You need a landscape of a security environment that the allies and partners agree provides the right environment to move forward on all of the myriad of goals that are spoken of in European capitals as well as our own capital. So the job of my boss, who happened to be a French four-star, by the way, was to help the 28 allies at the time. We're coming up on a few more now that we're getting ready to bring in some additional NATO members, to understand that future landscape, emerging threats, cyber, space, hybrid warfare, and to help the nations prepare their militaries develop the capabilities that they needed to be able to confront those future threats. So the political side of that is going across the capitals, again, building the common understanding, the minister to minister, president to prime minister level of we are going to commit these resources. We are going to build these capabilities, whether it's in manpower or machine, and we're going to train and field the capabilities to prepare for the Russia's emerging threats, the cyber threat from Russia, certainly the Middle East emerging threats, the current threats and emerging threats, and understand that we're going to face this together under Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which is the Common Defense Article. So relationships, the political side, relationships, that's what really mattered. What I learned in my couple years with NATO, I was also in charge of defense planning and of the amount of resources that each ally put into their militaries to help meet their fair share burden. So this is an area that we've made some progress on in the last several years through different administrations, which is really just as important. That's the military side of the pole mill. It's just as important that our friends and allies come to the table with their equal share, bear their burden of the cost of providing these defenses and capabilities as it is to have those relationships and be prepared to have a common front against our enemies.
Thank you for that. No greater national security challenge we face today than infectious diseases, which you referred to in your remarks. When you think about it, some of the greatest threats we face, Ebola, Zika in the past, now the coronavirus. A quick question to the audience to kind of set the stage. Today, in this interconnected world we live right now, quick quiz, how long does it take for a pandemic to spread anywhere on Earth? I got three choices for you. 1 week, 72 hours, 36 hours. How many would say it takes 1 week for the pandemic to spread? How about 72 hours? Show of hands there now. How about 36 hours? The third have it there. A day and a half for a pandemic to spread from one side of the earth to the other. The current outbreaks of the coronavirus, as the Congresswoman said, now over 70,000 reported infections. A couple in Illinois. I think some of them actually may have gone home actually recently were the last reports, but this is something that happens on the other side of the world, affects us here at home. Your background is remarkable, for having dealt with these very issues right now at HHS and infectious diseases. Talk to us, you referred to some in your remarks, but let's dive a little deeper into that too. How do these investments in a global health security structure around the world help us try and stop those pandemics in their tracks abroad so they have less capability to reach our shores here at home? How important is that for our national security?
Thank you for the question. So it is critically important. Every time a new infectious disease comes to the United States, it seems to take us by surprise. It's something that we've never seen before. It augments a gap in our capabilities, and people are just like stunned. And what's really a shame to me is that we continue to have this approach, even despite the long-range investments that we've been making at the federal level. I mean, just the fact that we know that climate change is real, that the spread of vector-borne illness is changing as a result of climate change and changing extreme weather events and the like. We know that this is something that we are going to continue to see express itself in different ways. So that's just number one. During my work in ASPR, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, we did have a number of these that we had to deal with. Now, Ebola was different. Ebola had maybe 11,000 worldwide deaths. And it challenged us, one, to contain it in those 3 countries, which was a real challenge, and we weren't completely effective with it. But the other thing was that we had to quickly develop both vaccine and treatment protocols. And there was real economic impact, right? We didn't have the supply chain to deal with domestic issues related to hospitalizations, prevention measures, and the like. So we really learned a lot as a result of our work with Ebola that I think we've seen put in place as the officials are dealing with the coronavirus. I think the differences now are that this illness is one where we don't have the same kind of strong relationships with the Chinese, where folks are really having a lot of faith in the validity of the information as it's coming out. We know that they are experiencing significant economic impacts right now, and so the relationships to what you were speaking about are one where it's impacting our ability to promptly and effectively respond, which underscores the value of documents and agreements like the Global Health Security Agenda, which has existed for a number of years, which, all major, I think every NATO country, and if not most, and then others around the world are participating in this. There's regular meetings at the ministerial level, the principal level, and just international convenings and the like. And it just underscores how important these things are so that we have the relationships, so that you can share information, samples, so that we can work together to find treatments and appropriate diagnostic tools and the like. So the challenge with coronavirus is that we're still learning about all the gaps that exist in the system.
It's a diplomatic challenge in addition to just a
100%.
technical, scientific one.
That's
too.
right.
Yeah. Let's move to the economy too. And Taryn, thanks for joining us here on stage. Also, we look at the evolution kind of development diplomacy when it comes to international economics, the growing role of public-private partnerships right now, and how important as a catalyst that is And I think another, that shift is there, the role of the international affairs budget in kind of setting the landscape and the playing field for greater exports from this state and around the country. But another key question is about the role of women and girls in economies right now. I have 104 countries have legal barriers that prevent women from fully participating in those global economies. And I know Cargill has centered a lot of its women's economic empowerment through improving women's agricultural skills, access to markets, working with small shareholder farmers, poultry and other areas, and to bolster food security. But talk to us on the big level about how does investing in women and girls, first of all, help lift some of these economies out of poverty, and how is that also in turn in our long-term interests as Americans for that type of engagement of what Cargill and others are leading on?
No, absolutely. It's a critical issue, and as a food and agricultural company, Cargill works with farmers at all levels of productivity around the world. And we don't just think about partnering with farmers, but also thinking about farmers as part of a broader community, part of a broader ecosystem, and really understanding like what are the challenges and the issues that those communities are facing. And oftentimes the barriers around women's economic empowerment are really poignant in many of these communities. We know that women are disproportionately impacted by poverty because they have less access to economic assets. And from an agricultural perspective, that could mean access to land or agricultural resources and inputs. And yet the staggering thing is that according to FAO's State of Food Security report from 2010, if women had equal access to the same agricultural resources as men, yields could improve by 20 to 30%. So there's clearly an economic driver incentive for ensuring that equality of access. And many of the ways that we think about how a company like Cargill can work in those markets, I mean, clearly we have a role to play through how we are providing access to markets, how we can include more women in our own supply chains, but also how we can partner with others. And that partnership can also take many different levels. We partner from an advocacy perspective. We have a 2-year collaboration with the One campaign around the Poverty is Sexist initiative, which is really trying to amplify stories of women and girls who are overcoming some of these barriers and finding ways to really drive change. We also had an initiative that we're really proud of we launched last year called Hatching Hope, which is focused on improving smallholder poultry producers, mainly women, but also as a way of driving their economic livelihoods and creating a solution to many of the nutritional challenges in some of these markets. Also, one of our long-standing partnerships is with CARE USA. We've worked with them for many years. And last year, we aligned our new phase of programming to CARE's She Feeds the World framework, which is very much focused on driving gender equality. And from an agricultural perspective, we know that that's something that we can really drive impact around. But I would say, I mean, all of these things, they're at the heart of Cargill because we're very fortunate. Our company's purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And we're able to activate that purpose in multiple different ways in some of the partnerships and initiatives that I mentioned. But it's not just about it being, the sort of purpose. It's also the right thing to do, and something that we're really trying to, leverage the skills and the expertise of our company, but also how we can partner with others to really drive change at scale.
Congressman, let's continue that conversation right now and talk about the connection of Northern Illinois' agricultural economy with the rest of the world. Just a couple of stats I have here. In the statewide, 22,550 Illinois companies exporting abroad last year. In agriculture, such an important part of the economy in this region, Illinois exported $8.2 billion in agricultural exports in 2017. So talk about how America's development, diplomacy programs, reaching abroad, trying to make those connections, to foster opportunity. We'll talk about that link that's so critical.
Yes, so I represent the 14th congressional districts. That's a half suburban, half rural community. We have a lot of corn and soybean farmers, our bean farmers, and Illinois at scale, we are the largest grower of soybeans in the United States, #1, and #1 exporter in the United States, and our largest client is China. And for those soybeans. And so talk about local impact, that is critical. And so reopening up that market, reinstating the strong trade relationship that we have historically had with the Chinese is critically important in the agriculture space. And it has rippling effects beyond just the farmer, but the whole ag sector, which I think is really important to amplify. Investments in cooperation have, impacts beyond that as well. So, in our district, we have Fermilab, which works with 175 institutions in 31 countries to support the Deep Underground Neutrino Project. And so, in the research space, there's impacts. Obviously, in the manufacturing space, there's impacts. And, Mr. Frericks knows this very well, but in last spring, the Taiwanese government announced that it would buy $2.2 billion worth of corn and soybeans from Illinois growers in the next 2 years, which is welcome news in the light of the ongoing challenges that we have with China. The deal comes at a time when our farmers need to replace our soybean sales with other countries. And that market is one that is not necessarily as large as we would have liked it to be in terms of countries that are interested in purchasing at scale that we are used to producing. And so, I am hopeful about this phase 1 deal that the president has negotiated. I am very, very, very discouraged that we have still not seen the complete details of that policy. And obviously, we know that they have not quite taken a diplomacy-first approach, which is one that I think is important when dealing with these types of significant issues and working with partners around the world.
So can I jump
Please
in,
do.
not to steal the mic from the moderator, but let's take that one further step
Yeah.
on a global scale. You've had a bunch of statistics about our export percentages to countries outside our borders. One statistic that hasn't been mentioned, it's either 80 or 90% of commerce, international commerce, moves by sea.
Something you're very familiar with.
80 to 90% moves by sea, and a great portion of that goes through the Straits of Malacca and the South and East China Seas. So as we think about trade, we think about growth, we think about global leadership, and we think about national security, they all intersect there in that part of the world to have a very potentially huge, perhaps catastrophic impact on our ability to move commerce if we don't counter China in their expansionist desires to make the South and East China Sea their lakes. And that's what they would like to do. Historically, that's how they perceive that part of the world to be. It's their area of influence, and they believe that they ought to control it. But it's not. It's international waters, and we cannot afford to stand by and let them take over that part of the maritime trade routes without, appropriate diplomatic protestations and military freedom of navigation acts, which you read about in the paper as well, where we actually sail out there and we go places that the Chinese wish we wouldn't, but we're showing that it's freedom of the seas and we have every right to be there, both our military and our commercial ships. So all of these things tie together in terms of global leadership, growth, and national security for the United States.
Our relationship with China coming up numerous points in our conversation already in terms of combating infectious disease, getting our trade relations right, so for export markets, and talking about the freedom of movement and goods too. I mean, it's a relationship that's going to define a lot of American foreign policy coming up in the decades. Admiral, let me go back to you to talk about a different dimension of your work in security in Asia, and that was in your service there in the region. It was defined by a number of incidents of disaster relief, including notably in Bangladesh after the cyclone hit in 2007. And this is a case where we have kind of the best of our military capabilities working alongside our civilian development and relief professionals. Tell us how that experience helped shape your understanding of the capacity of America, when we talk about our humanitarian values, to show the best of our values, coming to people's aid at a time of tragedy and disaster, where we bring out the best of both our military side and our civilian side, working hand in hand to bring relief to people who suffered so much.
I'd love to. I'd brag on those guys and gals all day. You all have, some of you have served, many of you maybe have relatives or children or friends who've served, and they're very proud to serve on their carriers and fly their planes and drive their submarines and carry their rifles. But one of the most proud moments that our service members have is when they can go to a country that's suffered an utter disaster, whether it's a typhoon, a mudslide, you name it. In the Pacific, unfortunately, there's a disaster a day. I hate to say it, but so much happens out there that takes away people's livelihoods and lives. For the Navy ship to sail over the horizon and to send our helicopters ashore and bring out the USAID representative and the State Department ambassador and have a convocation with all of the NGOs on the scene and figure out how to get food and water and medical care and truly save lives is beyond anything I think that you could really, it would just, make you tear up. To see how proud it makes us, how effective we can be in delivering that type of aid. You would be so proud of everyone involved, and we cannot do it alone. We cannot do it just as a military. We cannot do it just as a State Department, and certainly with the NGOs comes the support from our corporations as well. We have to go in there as a team and have all of those elements together to truly deliver an effective ability to help these folks. And they are so grateful, and it means so much to them that it paves the way for good relationships with the United States of America for decades. The one that Jason mentioned, Bangladesh, I also led a similar rescue operation in Burma and in Haiti in the 2010 earthquake. And the relationships that are built last decades, and they truly have a place in their heart for America because of that type of aid and succor that we can bring to them through these combined efforts.
Taryn, let's continue on that theme of America's values expressed. Your work as Director of Strategic Partnerships for Cargill. Let me have a quote from you about that public-private partnerships can lead to a profound and positive impact for millions of people. You referred earlier to your partnership with CARE, the humanitarian organization, an NGO that has helped 42,000 children complete primary school and increased incomes for 27,000 farmers across the world. What does this mean for Cargill's bottom line about why working with NGOs can leverage the strengths of both the for-profit, the nonprofit sector to bring these more positive development outcomes around the world and express our values really as Americans?
Sure. So Cargill has a long history of investing in the communities where we operate, and it's really a critical part of the work that we do every day. Last year, we invested over $60 million across 56 countries in initiatives around food security, sustainability, and education and economic development. And these programs are so critical, not only to be supporting our own license to operate, but also in building the development of these communities. And I will say that the whole role of partnerships is just so critical. And I think it's was very purposeful that there is a whole goal on this within the UN Sustainable Development Goals specific to partnerships and collaboration, because I think the opportunity that we have in collaborating to drive forward all the other goals that we want, can really only be advanced if we work together. And I think what's exciting as well about the SDGs or the global goals is the universal agenda that they are. So whether you're here in the US or in any other country around the world, they're really a unifying piece around how we can collectively drive that impact forward. I've been also really fortunate to see some of our programs in action and how that connects. I mean, some of the statistics we heard earlier around, the consumers of the future are going to be in many developing and emerging markets around the world. So if we can invest in those communities and those markets now, we're really, setting ourselves up for those customers of the future. So we really think, and I really believe and have seen, had the opportunity and to see how agriculture can really drive forward progress and bring solutions to many of these development challenges that we see around the world.
Before we get to your questions, I want to ask one more to the Congresswoman too, sticking on these humanitarian values theme and thinking about our own hemisphere. You were on a delegation that went to Central America last fall, visiting Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and seeing firsthand the drivers there, poverty, violence, corruption, that are pushing people out of there towards our border. You referred to this also in your remarks, but can we drill down more about what you saw there that convinced you to show what strong, effective American, U.S. Development diplomacy programs can address some of the factors that are forcing people to feel like they have to flee their own country to come here, and how we can address some of those root causes of migration through smart, effective U.S. programs?
So I did. I took the visit down to the Triangle countries. This was after visiting the border twice and seeing the inhumane, the cruel situation down at our U.S.-Mexico border, the conditions under which the migrants have been kept, unsanitary, truly inhumane, just heartbreaking conditions, and wanted to understand more about why people were coming up north. What I can tell you, the most surprising thing that I saw is when we would sit down and we would meet with State Department staff, either Foreign Service officers or the programmatic folks, who would tell us that at that time they were still spending fiscal $16. This is in the summer of 2019. And so since that point in time, the Congress had appropriated fiscal 17, fiscal 18, fiscal 19, and we were working on fiscal 20 funds. And so we had already appropriated that money for each of their programs, sent it out to the State Department, and had not reached the programmatic level where they were able to make the awards in the communities. And so think about it, in some of these places, which are so remote, where the United States and the critical foreign aid dollars that we send out are the ones that allow the kids to be in school all day. And without those funds, there's nobody there to ensure that they're not fending for themselves against the gangs that are seeking to recruit them beginning at age 8 with threats of violence, telling the young boys that if they don't join the gang, that they will kill their parents. The young girls saying that if they don't volunteer to be the girlfriend of one of these 8-year-old boys, then they will kill their parents or take away their homes. I mean, the threats of violence that these young people are navigating through are significant. And the antidote to all of those things are our investment. And what was heartbreaking was that we had these patriots, these Americans who have been dedicating their lives to spread democracy and hope in these countries, telling us that they didn't have an avenue to work with their own agency to ensure that the dollars that we had long ago appropriated reached them. And so from my perspective, we cannot have a policy that burns the candle on both ends, right? So you can't create a circumstance because of the denial of funds where folks are not able to manage extremely violent circumstances at home, extreme corruption, and lack of economic mobility, and create a circumstance where they are facing inhumane and very dangerous conditions when they are seeking help, asylum, and refuge in the United States. That is not who we are, and that certainly is not who we are when it comes to our neighbors. We have to be better leaders than that. And the challenge that I face, and when I look at the ongoing situation with the Remain in Mexico policy and the metering and all these things that we see as happen in this immigration space, is that it's not a reflection of our values, and it's really a shame.
Thank you for that. Great discussion so far. Now I want to hear from all of you. My colleagues, Robert and Robert, have mics if you want to raise your hand. And with two small stipulations, please tell us who you are, where you're from, who you're with, and please keep your question in the form of a question so that we can get to as many questions as possible and hear from our panelists. So who has a question for us so far? Robert, do you have one there? Who's got a question? Raise your hand so Robert can pass you the mic. Don't be shy. This is a time to... Who's got a question? Someone, right there. We got one right there. Thank you. Break the ice.
Nick Cornaris, North State Group.
Hey, Nick.
We heard about a lot of what I'll call global threats, large threats, but it seems to me that there's a lot of asymmetry out there. It can come in the form of the crisis we had in our real estate market. It could come with the latest disease that comes over the horizon, lack of education, which can self-radicalize people. So anybody want to kind of touch that third rail of how we address those things in a meaningful way?
Mm-hmm. Admiral, you want to start with that one?
Nope. Sounds like a political question to me.
I mean, we have to lead. We have to lead. And we are better resourced than a lot of places. Policy approach that was compassionate. And obviously, we've had American interests that we've pursued related to our security and growing our economy and protecting our homeland. But we've also had a policy that said that there are places that just don't have resources to be able to, or the capacity. So I think that we have seen a shift with this administration in the way that they demonstrate that signature American compassion that we are, I think, pretty proud of. And, you know, it's my hope that in the near term we'll find our way back.
Is your question meaning to the U.S. or meaning externally, the lack of education, the third rail issues?
Well, I mean, you know, education could be domestic or international.
Yeah.
People, how do we help guide that understanding and learning? I mean, once upon a time we were, okay. Once upon a time we were great because we filled a lot of gaps, like at the end of World War II. Promoted English as a language, promoted a lot of our cultural, political, constitutional questions. Now that stuff seems to have kind of is being filtered or shunted aside. And that's where I'm kind of going with education.
Do you mean domestically?
Pardon me?
Do you mean domestically?
And leadership abroad too, I think. You're
Yeah,
saying.
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
I think it's kind of open-ended. I mean, we are global, so you know our problems are everybody else's are ours. Right. I don't think anyone uniquely owns what I'm describing here. It's a question of, I like your idea of leadership. How do we address those things and move it forward?
Yeah, if I could, I think if we go back to kind of what the USGLC's primary tenets are, the kind of national security, growth, and global leadership were the top three that I thought touched on my areas of expertise. You have to prioritize. Sorry, we can be the most generous people in the world, which I believe we are, and we're anxious and want to help other societies and our own society succeed, and children to get not just educated but fed, have a roof, their parents have a livelihood, but you have to set some priorities. So to me, the national security can be one of the umbrellas to help us set those priorities, right? Because we do have to tend to our national security. That is a government's primary role, especially in a democracy. Growth is a very important role of the government, and global leadership. So putting all those on an equal basis is, in my view, not possible. They're going to pop up and down, right? Depending on resources, depending on will, and depending on the priorities that are set. Certainly by different administrations might have different priorities, but you cannot just ignore that resources are finite. And you can only do so much somewhere in the world and in your own country, and how do you determine what it is that you want to do?
Also important to remember that in terms of getting those resources for our civilian capabilities abroad, Congresswoman Underwood and her colleagues on a bipartisan basis have restored proposed cuts for the last 3 years from this administration That has been a really key thing in order to express that, to have those potentials to be able to affect educational health outcomes abroad. And our leadership has been because of Congress's standing up to restore that. We're grateful to you for that, for those votes. Thank you very much.
And just to add on that, we saw the president's budget proposal come out last week, early, I lose track of time, so early this month, let's just say that to be safe. And included in there was a proposed 20% cut to global health in the middle of a global healthcare crisis. I mean, it's just outrageous. And so, you know, while we know that there is a real need for these types of programs and dollars, we know that the impact that they have in the communities in which they land, we have to continue to be vigilant in making sure that those funding levels are not cut at these, you know, outrageous levels in order to continue to do this very critical work. And so, like, that's what we're working on right now. It's not only fighting back against this current threat, but also making sure that we have the dollars to continue to do the programmatic work.
Absolutely. We had a question over there. Robert.
Hello, I'm Simona Hajduk with Opportunity International. You touched on the concept of public-private partnerships. And my question would be around, where does that process start? What does it start with? And what are some of the key components for success, and maybe some examples of very successful public-private partnerships that you might want to share with us?
That sounds like a good one for you. Does it start with the public or the private, or how does this work?
Well, I guess from my perspective and being, you know, part of the private sector piece of partnerships, I think the really key starting point is really understanding what you're trying to drive towards, like what impact are you aiming to have, and also understanding the impact that you're aiming to have, really having a deep understanding of the challenges and the issues in the communities that you're really trying to impact. And I guess we're really fortunate because in many of the places where we have these programs, you know, we have a business presence, we have operations on the ground, we have employees on the ground, so we're really kind of immersed in these communities to really understand and learn what's going on, so that when we design programs, we can really make sure that we're delivering against some of those key needs. And what I would say then as well is it's understanding what do you bring to the table? What's your contribution in terms of the skills and expertise and resources, and then finding others that sort of fill a gap in what you don't perhaps have. And that's certainly been how we've tried to think about it, really leveraging the skills and expertise of others. I will also say what I could point you to, we actually did a learning report on one of our most significant partnerships with CARE. We actually had our Decade of Impact in 2018. We'd been working for 10 years across 10 countries on a rural development initiative. And we actually asked ourselves those exact same questions. Like, what was our starting point? Like, how did we actually do this? How did we manage to achieve reaching so many people and delivering this successful partnership? And it was really a kind of learning, reflection, and report that talked about, you know, sharing these mutual objectives, agreeing what we wanted to really drive towards, learning from things that didn't work. So I would encourage you can access it on Cargill.com. But I think those are really important questions to ask yourself up front, because you want to make sure that we leverage resources in the most effective way and really partner, you know, with organizations that we're all driving towards the same goals and objectives.
Great. I saw a hand over there. Robert, if you want to hand the mic there.
Steve Dishler with the Jewish United Fund. So the reliance and trust in United States leadership has been severely undermined. We're seeing in Europe considerations of if the United States is not there, then they have to develop their own military response. Of course, in the Middle East, with both Saudi Arabia, Israel, and what we did in Syria. So whatever happens after the next election, this kind of shift away from reliance on the United States is going to continue, or will exist. So how do you switch that? How do you move that, reverse that?
So question here on the state of America's global leadership right now, its credibility, and what, if anything, to address that in the aftermath of the upcoming election?
Well, I think that it starts with the State Department and how over the last several years we've seen a real weakening in both stature and also capacity in that organization. And we need to rebuild the State Department, make sure that our diplomats and foreign service officers feel supported, making sure that we are filling the vacancies for these critical roles, making sure that we are putting the appropriate funding behind these initiatives. These ideas have the support in the Congress.
They do.
And they have the support among the American people. And so I think that we will be able to reclaim our position on the global stage. I don't have a concern necessarily about that with either in the fall or in 4 years, the departure of the Trump administration. But I do think that we will have to be very, very, very intentional about it. It will not happen passively. And so it has to be an explicit goal, an explicit priority, and one that we have to be comfortable speaking about. Let me tell you, in this community, as I walk around, it's very, very, very rare for people to bring up these issues. Extremely rare. And if they do, it's generally in the context of immigration. And not in the context of national security, not in the context of any kind of economic issue or the like. And so in this community, I think that one of the things that this group can help us do is spark these conversations because there is wide-scale impact. And we know that it's part of these core share values that we have here in Northern Illinois. It's just not a topic of conversation. And as we move to make that shift back, in terms of the investment, we're going to need to discuss it so that everybody just understands where we're headed.
And some of them are happening, though. I mean, talking about coronavirus, our international economic relations right now for our overseas markets and your soybean farmers, they aren't necessarily connecting them to what we're doing proactively through our civilian tools. That's the gap right now. But they are understanding there are things out there that are affecting them back here, and it's making those connections that we do in this community so well to say that being positive and intentional about them are so critical to make it happen. We got time for one more question. The gentleman there had one there, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Kat Batista with the Aurora Food Pantry. I think for me, sometimes why I struggle in hearing these types of dialogues is not because the work that's not being done overseas isn't incredible. It is. It's powerful and it's compelling and hopeful, and when I hear about what's happening with consumers and how it's going to help improve our economy, it's amazing. But then in our role, I also know that we have 113,000 people that are hunger insecure that are passing through our program right here in the city of Aurora every single year. And how do you as leaders on the global level reconcile the fact that we have massive problems here on the very local level that are not being addressed? And how do we the private sector, we're trying to address it. How do you reconcile being a leader on the bigger scale when we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are hunger insecure right here in our own country?
Thank you for that. We have a couple of questions and not a lot of time left. So why don't we combine two more questions, then we can close out by answering them. We have this lady here in the orange, and then the gentleman there back in the dark tie.
Judy Ledgerwood from Northern Illinois University, the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. So it actually feeds on the question just before that Congressman Underwood, I very strongly support your notion of rebuilding the State Department, and that there's great capacity diminished there. There are offices that are just empty, and there are offices that are understaffed, and programs that we cooperate with. And I wanted to tie it back to the Admiral's comments, because I think the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea, there's this perception that we've withdrawn diplomatically because we're doing less to support democracy groups and so on. And China's just, pouring in billions and hundreds of thousands of people. And there's a sense that, I don't know how to counter this notion that America's sort of withdrawn. And so it's to our detriment, both diplomatically and militarily, I think.
Great. And one final question there, Robert, if you can get to that gentleman there, and then we can combine them for our panel to wrap up this great discussion.
All right, David from Consulate General of the Czech Republic. Thank you for having me at the event. My question to you is, you mentioned the global leadership multiple times. My question is, what do you think should be the balance between the US global leadership and the local culture values and the ways how the local cultures might view their future in the world?
So a meta question to finish this up. So we have a first question, a balance between how do we continue while we're addressing global hunger to still look at issues of hunger and poverty here at home as well. A question of where is U.S. global leadership going right now, our capacity, certainly in Asia to be able to express it, but are we investing our capabilities enough to be able to continue to lead? And the balance is if we exercise global leadership, about how we strike that balance with respecting local cultures, local traditions as well, to make the strongest impact. So to wrap us up, three easy ones.
I'll start kind of on the global leadership point, and even back to your question as well. I guess I would characterize it a little differently. I don't think we're walking away from global leadership. I think we're just reorienting our focus more on China and maybe a little less on the Middle East, though obviously we're very strong supporters still of Israel and Jordan and trying to find a way out of Afghanistan and all of the problems there, trying very much to find a way out of that will not leave an awful disaster in our wake. But we're moving military forces to that part of the world. We're reorienting our relationships in terms of, again, this balance that I talked about with NATO. We're doing the same thing with South Korea and with Japan, demanding that they bear a bigger burden of the military capabilities that are needed to offset China's enormous growth in those capabilities. And to me, the whole position of the administration on trade wars, on these other aspects, are meant to try to bring a balance a little bit back into really the great power competition, because we are in a new great power competition. Russia wants to be there, not so fast, but they're making a dent. China certainly is a peer competitor and will exceed our capabilities in the future in every aspect of life as you see it today, if we don't tackle some of these really complicated areas. So I don't think we're walking away from global leadership. I think we're just reorienting, rebalancing, and reprioritizing a little bit.
Thank you. Why don't I go to Tara next and have you close, Congresswoman, with your thoughts?
Okay. Just to touch on the hunger question, we heard over the holidays a change in administration policy, which was going to kick off like hundreds of thousands of families from SNAP. We see the very fragile network of support services unraveling because of lack of investment here in the United States. And that is a policy choice. What we are talking about with our investment in international affairs is one that has been a long-standing pillar in the way the United States approaches its relationships with other countries in the world and the way that we express our core values around partnership. And we are not seeing any type of commensurate increase, or what we're seeing is, significant clawbacks there as well. And so I hear you with the challenges that we have domestically, but I hope that you don't receive that in any way as a competition with the work that we are doing to take care of people in our communities. Because I think that we are talking about having to fight the issue of hunger on every level. And I think it's important that we do that. More broadly, in terms of global leadership, we know that we have tremendous partners in industry, tremendous partners in military and diplomacy. We have a whole cohort of veterans here who could probably speak more eloquently about this issue than I have over the last hour, and know that we are in good shape because of the way that our community prioritizes. We're sitting here in Aurora, Illinois, the second largest city in our state, a growing community, a community that recognizes and welcomes individuals from all over the world, and the way that we are increasingly boosting our economy is through these kind of partnerships and relationships that we're talking about building. that's the way forward. That's the way that we have this shared success. And so I'm excited when I think about the future. I hope, to your point, ma'am, that our partners around the world don't consider us all to be in retreat, and that America is walking away from our responsibilities and our relationships, because I don't see that at all. And I think that as we have a new generation come into leadership in this country, we'll have an opportunity to help shape that path forward for years to come. Thank you.
That's a great way to conclude this conversation. I think on that note, I'm going to ask my colleague Robert Watson to close this program today. But first, I want to, on behalf of this audience, really thank you, the three of you, for a fantastic, really fascinating conversation today on America's role in the world. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all your good questions as well. I really appreciate it. Now, Robert Watson.
Thank you very much, Jason. Congresswoman Underwood, Admiral Pottinger, Taryn Barkley, thank you for your contributions today and what was really a terrific conversation. We appreciate you being here with us today. I'd also like to thank Cargill one more time for their continued support for our Heartland Initiative. And last but not least, I'd like to thank everyone here in this room for being here today, particularly our advisory committee members, our veterans for Smart Power, and of course everyone who traveled from across the state to be here today. We really do appreciate your time and your participation, and your engagement is really, really important to us. We encourage you to stay engaged. So when Congresswoman Underwood and other members of Illinois' congressional delegation speak out in support of these programs, take action in support of America's development and diplomacy programs, please do make sure to say thank you. Your gratitude goes a really long way, and your engagement in showing how America's engagement in the world is important for Illinois is also really very critical, so keep that in mind. On that note, some of you that are new to USGLC, it's a good opportunity to opt into communications from the coalition to stay updated on what's going on. And please do join us in Washington, D.C. on June 15th and 16th for our annual State Leadership Summit. It's a great opportunity to learn more about these issues and, of course, carry on these conversations with your congressional delegation on the Hill. And lastly, coming up in May, as a sort of follow-on to this, we'll be hosting a conference call to give you a budget update, talk about our ongoing work here in Illinois. So keep that in mind as well. Thanks again for your support, your passion, and particularly your voice. Stay in touch, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you. Thank you.